Hello, my name is Adam McLeod, and this is my presentation on my chosen dream PC. My chosen machine is built with the idea of future-proofing a PC as far as possible, along with the capability to be expanded and changed easily when components and performance slows. My chosen budget for this machine was 20 grand. This is a fair amount of money, but to future-proof for more than 3 or so years this kind of money is required. As this build costs so much, it has a very specific target audience. This audience includes people who work a very media-based job, consistently requiring computer access. People who might fit this category would include successful YouTube channel hosts, web designers, or even animators, jobs requiring high-level, difficult rendering processes. Although this machine would also serve a base for all personal needs as well, such as entertainment, mainly gaming, or personal projects. For this machine, I have chosen to go above and beyond what would be considered reasonable. To house these components, my chosen case is the Corsair 900D. To power my components, Schul Corsair AX1500i PSUs. To connect all of these components, I shall use the Asus Rampage 5 Extreme motherboard. To process this machine, I have chosen an Intel Core i7-5930K. This will be cooled with a Corsair H100i. As for primary storage, I have chosen a 64GB RAM setup of Corsair Vengeance RAM. For secondary storage, I have chosen a 1TB Samsung 850 SSD. This will also be the boot disk, the house of the OS, along with a total 9TB of WD Black Series hard drive space for storage. And on top of this, an LG WH16 NS40 ODD. For graphical power, I have chosen 4 AMD Radeon R9 290s. And as for peripherals, I have chosen a Rat7 along with a Mech 5 from Asia. Lastly, for my monitor setup and headset, I have gone with 3 Asus ROG Swift PG278Qs and a Sennheiser PC333D headset. Here we see the basic data flow for any PC. Within my PC, the data flow will follow like this. We start with my primary storage. This holds all current data which is being used or processed by the machine. Then we move on to secondary storage. Data held on here is either personal data or program data, which is processed by the machine. In this section we would also find the operating system. In this case, this would be Windows 7 held on the SSD. From there we move on to our input devices. These devices input data into the computer, generally data modified by the user. The general input devices we find are keyboards and mice. I have also listed my microphone. Inputted data and program data then needs to be processed by something. This is the processing section of the data flow chart. Here we find the CPU. This handles all of the machine's processes on all levels, from fan control to rendering. Although some of this load could be handed off to an expansion card, such as the GPU. This means that the CPU has less load, letting it run faster. Here we have our output devices. These devices output data from the computer either to be displayed or passed on. These devices normally include a monitor and some speakers, although in this case our GPUs also count as our output devices. Although GPUs can handle graphical processing tasks as well if needed. Lastly, we have our input-output devices. Our major device we find here is the motherboard. An input-output device handles two-way data flow between different components, normally within the computer, although this could include machines which inputs user data and outputs the same data elsewhere, like a labeling machine. Now time to move on to my different components. To start off, we have the purpose of the case. The case plays the part of protection. It houses all of your components in an electronically safe situation, keeping all units separate from any pieces of unwanted metal or conductive materials. This also helps to protect against static electricity. The case I have chosen is the 900D. It costs $573.84 from PVTech currently. Its dimensions are 649.6mm by 252mm by 691.6mm. The positives of the 900D include the fact that it supports ITX through to HPTX sized motherboards, the smallest to the largest, and comes with 10 rear expansion slots, 4 front 5¼ inch slots, and capabilities for up to 15 internal 3.5 or 2.5 inch slots. These attributes make expansion of the PC not a problem, as it has more than enough space and slots for as much equipment as you want. Also, the 900D is made from steel with extremely good build quality, making it safe to hold these components in case of emergency or damage to the case. Inside the 900D, a lot of space and thought has gone into cable management, including 8 cable grommets and a fairly large amount of space behind the rear plate to fit wires. Cons of the 900D is that it weighs a total of 18.6 kgs on its own and takes up a lot of space, as can be seen from its dimensions. Here we have the purpose of the PSU. The PSU is what provides all of your components with power, but it also grounds all of your components in case of a surge. This is why it is important to have your PC plugged in, but off when working on it, as all components are grounded, which makes them safe and hard to damage mistakenly. The PSU also converts power coming out of the wall from alternating current to direct current, AC to DC. My power supply choice was Joule AX1500Is. These cost a total of $1,299.90 from Computer Lounge currently. The pros of having this much power is expansion, being able to handle a lot of the upcoming components with ease. The other pro about this choice is the cable management. Because these power supplies are fully modular, it is easy to be neat with cabling, as you can remove excess cables. The con of having this setup is the amount of space the PSUs take up in the basement of the 900D, and also the power consumption caused by having 2 large wattage PSUs. The motherboard has a very dominant purpose within a machine. The motherboard is the biggest input-output device in your computer, and handles the transference of all data between components. Subsequently, all components are plugged into the motherboard. The motherboard is what controls the basic level of hardware through the BIOS, which stands for Basic Input-Output System. The motherboard I have chosen for this build is the Asus Rampage 5 Extreme. This board costs $795 from First Wave Technologies currently, and has an eATX form factor, 30.5 cm by 27.2 cm. Firstly, I would like to cover the onboard devices we have here. The first major one is USB. This is important as the current universal controller for almost any external device. If I were to add a printer to this build, I would use a USB port to connect it, although I have not included a printer as I have found they are needed less and less today with digitalization. The next onboard device I will cover is networking. This board has an onboard network card, which handles the Wi-Fi ports and the Ethernet port found on the back I/O ports. These ports allow the computer to transfer data between other computers through a network. The last of these onboard devices is video. The onboard video provided would normally output the current data onto a monitor or a data projector, but this will not be the case as I have GPU which will be outputting the video. The pros of this motherboard are quite substantial. This includes the option for expansion. With 4 PCIe slots wired as 16x, 8x, 16x, 8x, along with a PCIe 1x slot and a PCI slot, this board has very good expansion options. Further from this, the board has 8 DIMM slots for RAM, making it easy to outfit large amounts of memory. These slots do support DDR4 RAM. To top it off, this board also has 12 6 gigabits per second SATA ports and 2 SATA Express ports down the right hand side. This is for storage and other components like an SD card reader. When you take this, along with the capability for 14 USB 3.0 ports, 6 USB 2.0 ports, the capabilities of this motherboard are quite numerous. Other pros of this motherboard is the fact that it includes a built-in Wi-Fi card. This is very uncommon for motherboards, and it saves an expansion slot having to be used for a wireless card. This is the same for sound. In this motherboard, the bottom left section is dedicated to sound, making it fairly pointless to include a sound card in this build, further saving space. Negatives of this board are mainly the issue of size. This board only fits in a few cases due to its large form factor. Another con of this build is that it supports very few very new processors, as it uses the newest Intel socket, LGA 2011-3. Although this should become less of a problem as time progresses and newer processors are released. Now we move on to the purpose of the CPU. The CPU handles all primary processing of all programs and threads. The load generated by this might be given off to a GPU for specific tasks, such as graphical rendering. The CPU also handles basic control over specific hardware within the machine, such as fan control and the use of unnecessary hardware like the ODD or unused hard drives. although the CPU also handles all complicated tasks as well. The CPU I have picked for my build is the Intel Core i7-5930K. This costs $854 from PC Force, currently. This CPU uses the new Intel socket LGA 2011-3. This is a major positive as it means the CPU is compatible with the motherboard. Positives of this CPU is its processing capability, which can be portrayed by its attributes. This CPU has 6 cores with a boost clock of 3.7 GHz per core. Along with Intel's hyper-threading, this CPU can run up to 12 threads. A negative of this CPU is that it comes with no cooler, although that is because it is assumed you would be overclocking the CPU. If you are buying it in the first place, this would mean that you would require a more advanced cooler than the ones normally provided by Intel. The purpose of a CPU cooler is to keep the CPU at a cool working temperature. This also increases run speeds and the efficiency of the CPU. Following on from this, a good CPU cooler can make it easy to overclock your CPU. The CPU I have chosen is the Corsair H100i. This unit costs $195 from First Wave Technologies currently. Positives surrounding this unit are fairly simple, as it is a standalone unit, meaning you don't have to worry as much about leakages. It makes cable management very easy as the cable lengths are very exact and already fitted, and also this is extended a little more in our situation as it is designed by Corsair, making it easy to install into our Corsair 900D. Cons of this unit are in relation to the motherboard. In the picture to the right, you can see how close those tubes are from the RAM slots. If the RAM is hard up against those tubes, it may cause a kink, breaking our loop. The other con is the vulnerability to leakages and damaging equipment through water or electrical damage. The purpose of primary storage is to handle all of the immediate data flow, which is all current running program data which you are using, along with all background tasks. Graphics RAM is the same, although this handles other tasks which are required by the GPU, along with graphical aspects you may be using. The primary storage I have decided to use is a total of 64 GB of Corsair Vengeance RAM. This costs a total of $1,572 from Paradigm PCs currently. Positives of having this memory is that it includes its own cooling solution, a heatsink, which increases performance. Another positive is at this point there will be no restrictions with any program you choose to run when you have 64 GB of RAM, although this may change in the future. Negatives of this is the lack of space you are left with, meaning that if you want to add RAM, you would have to remove another RAM stick first to do so. The purpose of secondary storage is storage for all semi-permanent storage. This is where data that you have saved and wish to use later is kept. Things like the operating system and personal files are kept here as they are needed for use of the computer. This is different from RAM as the RAM is cleared after each restart. Secondary storage can also be used for transporting data, such as a USB stick or a disk. For secondary storage, I've selected 3 WD Black Series 3TB hard drives, which costs $809.85 from Computer Lounge currently. A 1TB Samsung 850 Pro SSD, which costs $918.85 from PBTech currently. And lastly, an LG WH16 NS40, which costs $126 from Paradigm PCs currently. This leaves me with a total of 9 TB for storage, a 1TB SSD for boot, and an ODD for disks. The pros of having a large SSD for boot is fast boot speeds, along with fast access of data stored on the SSD. A con of having an SSD is that when an SSD comes within about 20 to 50 GB of its maximum capacity, it begins to slow down. This is because SSDs are unable to run at full capacity. This somewhat limits the SSD space, although this is only a minute problem in this situation. The positives of having a large amount of hard drive storage is that it means I won't have to clear out old files or delete anything I may not want to from lack of space. This is also in preparation for the future and for much larger files like 8K videos or holographic movies, depending on how the technology develops. The last pro of having this hard drive set up is so that if one fails, I don't lose all my data. 3 TB is a lot to lose, but it isn't 9 TB. A negative of using hard drives is that they use magnets and moving parts, making them prone to magnetic fields and kinetic energy, making it easier to lose data on these devices. A pro of having an ODD is able to install drivers with ease at the start, when you do not have an internet connection yet. Another positive is being able to use older software you may have lying around in disk format. A negative of this is that it takes up one more space and faces the same vulnerabilities as a hard drive when running. Expansion cards are add-ons which add computing power or capabilities to your computer through the PCI and PCIe slots. These cards could include sound cards, GPUs, networking cards, Ethernet or wireless, Bluetooth cards, etc. These cards may require more power than that given by the socket, meaning they may also need to be plugged directly into the PSU. This is very common with GPUs. Expansion slots give the purpose of expansion and personalization. For my selection of expansion cards, I have gone with 4GB Radeon R9 290s. This costs a total of $2,295.36 from PBTech currently. I have gone with this setup because it provides large amounts of graphical processing power with a top-end card from AMD. Pros of this setup is that it has a large amount of capabilities with this amount of power. The other major positive is that it does support my 3-monitor setup at its maximum refresh rate and maximum resolution. The last positive is that it is currently a new card with good specs in relation to technology today, meaning it has a good chance to last. This is backed up by the 4-way Crossfire setup. Negatives of this is that it leaves no room for other expansion cards, and to add other cards to this build you would need to remove one of the GPUs. The other negative is the power this draws. This wouldn't have an effect on the PSU, but certainly contributes to the amount of power being drawn from the socket, increasing power costs quite dramatically. This is because each GPU acts like its own small computer, as it has its own RAM, CPU, and cooling system. The purpose of the keyboard and mouse within a system is as direct input, used to control the system. The keyboard provides more accessibility as it is used to control the BIOS and the UEFI. The mouse is seldom used for these reasons unless a separate code has been loaded to make it compatible. This only happens in UEFI. The mouse, although, has extreme capabilities when it comes to the operating system as it controls the cursor on screen. For my selection of keyboard and mouse, I have chosen a Mech 5 from ASIO, which costs $121.60 from Newegg with free shipping. On top of this, I have also chosen a Rat 7 from Mad Catz, which costs $124.89 from PBTech. The pros of these peripherals are very similar. Both have the option to customize, making the user side of this build easy to modify. This can be done through the extending or shortening of different parts on the Rat, and by removing or adding sections on the keyboard, such as the keypad. The other pro behind these devices is the quality and capabilities. Both devices are well built and easily fixed, as pieces can be removed and replaced. The quality is ensured through the mechanical key setup on the motherboard, increasing reliability, and the high 6400 DPI sensitivity of the mouse. The last positive is that these peripherals suit the color scheme of this build, black and red. The only negatives with these peripherals is that both are wire restricted, making them only slightly more restricted in use. The purpose of monitors within a system is the basic output. A monitor displays current data or preset data from within the machine. With a monitor, the computer is able to output complicated, detailed data which the user is able to control or not, depending on the current situation. For my monitor setup, I have gone with 3 Asus ROG Swift PG278Q monitors. This costs a total of $5.5 grand from Paradigm PCs currently. The positives of these monitors include a high resolution of 2560 by 1440p, along with a 1 millisecond response time. This is 144 Hz, and a 27-inch form factor. These monitors also support G-Sync, which helps to have a smoother frame rate within programs if used properly. As these monitors will provide large amounts of space, it will be easier to work with this setup, as it will be easier to lay out multiple programs for viewing at a single time. The last positive of this setup is that the stands are able to swivel and the screens are able to rotate. This means you can have the screens in almost any layout you want. Along with this, and small bezels with good build quality, the screens will also look good and work well for anyone's needs. Negatives with this setup is the power consumption. Running a total display of 1440 by 7680p when the screens are in landscape mode, a 1 millisecond response time will draw a lot of power also. This adds up to the continuing costs of this build. The purpose of the headset is that it is an input and output device. Although not an input-output device, this is different because it inputs data and outputs data, but it does not transfer the data within itself. And the two different actions a headset can do are separate from one another, a microphone and a set of speakers. Different headsets can provide other capabilities though, depending on the quality of sound and recording. For example, a 7.1 surround sound could be another capability for a headset. For my headset, I have chosen a Sennheiser PC333D 7.1 channel headset. This costs $319.99 from PB Tech currently. The positives of this headset include its capability to provide a 7.1 virtual surround sound setup, giving a very accurate representation of positioning and sound. The next major positive is that it provides its own sound card to provide high quality audio. The following pros are that it has high quality microphone, over-ear cups which increase comfort, and the customizability given by the joints halfway up the frame. And lastly, the quality that is ensured by the brand, as Sennheiser is known to last with good overall quality. The only negatives related to this headset is that it is wire restricted, and may be difficult to hear other sounds outside of the headset, like being called on by a friend or an emergency alarm. The purpose of the operating system for a PC is its overall control of the hardware within the computer, letting the hardware work in unison. The OS also provides a complex GUI for the user to control, whilst giving a base for other software applications along with the drivers and utilities. The baseline purpose of the OS is to manage the data flow within the machine. This is what we saw on the first few slides. For my operating system, I have gone with Windows 7 Ultimate. This costs $311.86 from Ascent Technology currently. The positives of this operating system is its capabilities given by the open source effect the system has. This is extended by the customizability given. The other positives of this is that we have already seen how this system has lasted, as Windows 7 was released on July 22, 2009. This means that it has already been 6 years since release, increasing its reliability. Despite its age, the system is still considered one of the best operating systems ever made, and is even disputed to be better than the more current versions of Windows, Windows 8 and Windows 8.1. Due to this, we can assume that it will continue to last in the future for a considerable amount of time. The last pro associated with this product is its development capability, posed again by the open source qualities it holds. The only negative associated with this system is that it is 6 years old. Although this is a positive, it can also be a negative, as it implies that Windows may no longer be interested in continuing the product in the future. To summarize my build, the money spent on this build came to a total of $15,506 New Zealand dollars and 28 cents. When this is deducted from my budget of 20 grand, it shows that I have $4,493.72 left over. This is good because it means that I was below my budget, although this is not great as it means I was quite a bit off in my estimations as for how much this build would cost. Whether this build is future-proof or not, it would be hard to say unless we came back to this build in 5 or so years and compared the power it would produce in comparison to technology of that year. My personal belief is that it would last a little longer than 5 years due to the sheer massive space, expansion, and power given off by this machine. Although it is easy to say that different products within this build would become outdated at different rates. For example, the operating system might become obsolete before the hard drives fail or corrupt. In this build, compromises I have had to make include the power, aesthetics, and the space that this build affects. This is because I have gone with the most powerful components currently available with a little bit of my own personal choice. This means I have had a disregard for power and the space taken up by this build. Although, this also means I have taken into account the aesthetic look given off by this build, as most of the components follow a basic red-black color scheme. This is followed through a base of black from all of the chosen Corsair products, along with red from the keyboard, mouse, and motherboard. Overall, I believe this build is something only for people wanting to overclock and have a substantial amount of power, and would also not recommend this PC to an average user, as it would be far beyond their use. Thank you for watching.